I want to welcome Jeff Hilimire, author, entrepreneur, family man. What else do you have going?
Thanks, Joe.
Nonprofit founder and organizer.
Art curator.
Community activist.
Right.
All those things.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you today, Jeff. I am a big fan, as you know, and I have read both of your books.
You're the one.
So I wanted to talk to you about your most recent book, which is The Crisis Turnaround, right?
That's right.
And your original book, The 5-Day Turnaround, was written as a parable, and it was designed to help help corporate executives who are in large bureaucratic organizations think and act more like an entrepreneur.
That's right. Yeah, the 5-Day Turnaround was definitely written mostly for leaders at corporations that want to act more entrepreneurial, want to move more quickly, be more agile, to think like an entrepreneur. So it's also sort of written for nonprofit leaders because they sort of struggle with the same thing. But yeah, and so the Crisis Turnaround was the second book, but in the timeline of the books, it actually happens.
So here's the question. Do you recommend people read The Crisis Turnaround first and then The 5-Day Turnaround, or does it make more sense to go the other direction?
Yeah, I do. And interesting to me, the next book I'm writing is going to happen before The Crisis Turnaround. So I think reading them in that order, Crisis Turnaround now, then 5-Day makes more sense. The thing about Crisis Turnaround is I tried to write it so that it's not that you have to be in a crisis to appreciate it. There's lessons that we learn as leaders while leading through a crisis that can be applied sort of in any time. So hopefully it doesn't turn people off from saying, well, things are better now. I don't need to check it out.
Well, let's hope that they are better so that they...
That's right.
Yeah.
That's got to happen first.
Yeah. So before we jump into the book, I want to just quickly ask you some questions about the process of writing the book, because I know
Sure.
For your first book, you did that over, a period of time, and the process was pretty lengthy because you'd never been published as an author before. So you had to figure out all the steps about securing a publisher and all of the steps that you didn't know about. But then obviously the second book, you understood that whole process a lot better. So tell me about the process writing the first book and then how it was so different for the second book.
Yeah, the first book took about a year from start to finish once I started writing it. But even before that, it took me I tried to get a publisher, like a real legit publisher, for 6 or so months. And the publishing world kept saying to me, it's better if maybe you self-publish. We're all good on this. So I ended up self-publishing, but creating my own LLC to publish under Ripples of Hope Publishing. So that as I write more books, there's learning there, and I can, sort of draw on the best practices of the first book and what we learned. So I would say it was a year and a half from start to finish. And then the Crisis Turnaround, it really took less than 45 days to get it.
I was like month and a half versus a year and a half.
Yeah. Now it's a shorter book. It's a faster book, shorter book, as you know. It's about half the size.
Yeah.
But certainly we learned a lot, so that the process went much faster. And I knew it needed to get out because we're in the middle of a crisis. So I was like, all right, I just need to put my head down and get this thing out.
So you said we learned a lot. Who is we? Who is team Jeff Hilimire that actually did all this work?
Yeah, it's the team at Dragon Army. So Jessica Caruth, Rochelle Kuramoto, DMF, who you worked with, are the three main people that helped me. Rochelle from sort of editing and overall sort of strategy of the book. Jessica was so many things, quarterback, really running sort of the whole process for us. And then DMF really has learned how
Dorothy Miller Farlio.
Yes, unbelievable human being.
Yes.
So that's a team that helped me get it through. And then we have other editors on the Dragon Army team that helped get the editing part of it done. So yeah, this time it was a total team effort.
But so the first book, the purpose was like, let's actually create a real physical book. And this was just published straight to Kindle or straight to Amazon, right? And straight digitally, I guess I should say.
Yeah, just at first. So I think mid-July we'll have the paperback version out. But
Got it.
to get it out as fast as possible, we just decided to do it digitally.
Wow. And so does this second one go through a publisher as well, or is this totally self-published versus the first one, which was a publisher?
Well, again, the first one was the publisher that I created, Ripples of
Okay, got it.
Publishing.
Got it.
Yeah. So both go through that umbrella, but basically both are self-published.
Okay. So why did you write this book? I mean, obviously the COVID started happening, the pandemic, global pandemic. And if you're watching this at a future date, we went through this amazing pandemic in, not amazing in a good way, but it began kind of in the United States in February 2020. And, here we're recording this in June 2020 and with no real end in sight.
Yeah. So, as I'm sure you did too, I mean, you're running a very successful business. As we were quarantined, as budgets were being cut, as just everybody was on high alert, I was reading everything I could, talking to you, and I had many talks. I was talking to friends of mine that lead companies. I was leading Dragon Army and watching, in particular, Jen Leahy at Dragon Army do a lot of the heavy lifting. As you know, right when all this happened with COVID, I lost my best friend and co-founder of Dragon Army, Ryan Tuttle.
Who the book's dedicated to. Yeah.
That's right. And so that was March 17th that he passed away. And so I needed a couple weeks to grieve and to process that. And Jen stepped up and led Dragon Army. So I say that to say I was sort of watching her lead, watching our team react, hearing and listening to all these things. And I thought, the best way that I'm going to get better at leading during a crisis is to put it on paper and start, committing some of this to words. That helps me. And then I just said, you know what, I might as well push this next book and see if there's something there. And as I started writing it, I started saying, all right, there's a lot going on here. And I don't profess to be the most amazing crisis leader. It's ideas from there's very possibly things you shared with me that you're doing at setup that I put into the book as ideas. So it's just a lot of ideas coming together of how to lead during some sort of traumatic experience.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about a couple early things that struck me when I got into the book. And by the way, it is a much shorter book and a faster read. I read half of it on a Saturday and the other half on a Sunday. And I think total, it maybe took me, I don't know, maybe 3 hours max to read the entire book. So it's one of those books that if you are struggling to figure out how to deal with the challenges that you're facing in any kind of crisis, you can pick it up and read it quickly. It was written in a very interesting style. I know the first book, or the second book, however you want to look at it, the original book,
like Star Wars at this point. I don't know which.
Right. The 5-day turnaround was written very much as a parable, and you tried to keep that for this new book. Although to me, it felt less parable-y. It was more like, the two main characters in the book meeting and then talking through. It was packed full of tips, and the tips were organized into 3 sections or kind of larger chapters, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm wondering why the parable format is appealing to you and why you chose to do it that way.
When I was first writing the 5-day turnaround, I was first of all, I was trying to write a book that I don't think had been written before. There's plenty of books on how to be a great entrepreneur, how to run a startup, how to be innovative. There's plenty of books on how to be a corporate leader. I hadn't seen any book that said, here's how you can take the best traits and characteristics of an entrepreneur and embody those within a corporation where you're not calling all the shots. And so my first idea was to write it and research, find case studies, and I just couldn't find anything out there. And then, I've been a big fan of Patrick Lencioni for years. His books, the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. There's some amazing books on leadership. And so I decided at one point I was just going to try my hand at writing in a parable style. What if the main character was running an agency, and what if his client was the one he's trying to help think like an entrepreneur? So actually I was with my writing partner at the time, Stan Rapp, who's a mentor of mine, but also has written marketing books. And so I was going back and forth with him on ideas, and I suggested that. And at first he was like, I don't think that's the best use of our time, young man.
It's not wasting your time. Yeah.
And so I said, how about this, Dan? Give me the weekend. Let me write 15, 20 pages and see it. So I did that, and he ended up liking it, and I really enjoyed it. So finished that book. And then when I started to write this one, it just felt very natural to step back into those characters and imagine what would happen with them if they were going through a crisis. And what's funny about writing like that is that when I start, I don't really know where it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Like I literally write something happens and I have to go, well, how would she react to that? And how would he process that? And then bring it to life. So it's just a fun way for me to write. I also find you can get through the books much faster that way. I feel like the lessons are a little easier to digest when you read about someone experiencing them versus, here's what this case study says. That always is easier for me.
Yeah. Well, for those of us who know you personally, it was fun too, because it helped, it caused those of us who do know you to think about who were the people in your life that influenced each character, knowing that, and having conversation with you, knowing that they're not one single person. In some cases, they're a hybrid.
That's right.
But I know many of the people that are in the book, even though, and also you played with some of the names, like there's a Shara in the book, and we both know somebody named Shara, and she's in a different role in the book than in real life, but it was kind of fun to see some of that pop in there.
Yeah. I definitely pulled from different characteristics of friends like yourself and said, all right, let me have some fun with this.
Yeah, it's cool. So before we get into the guts of like what's in the book, I wanted to read the quote that you chose to include at the beginning, which is, and also it's interesting, you chose to say that it's Bobby Kennedy and not Robert Kennedy. But the quote is, I think you have one time around, and I don't know what's going to be in existence in 6 months or a year. So I think that you're here on earth to make some kind of contribution. I'm impatient. I suppose I wish everybody would be impatient. So tell me about that quote and why that is meaningful to you, and also why you chose that quote for the beginning of the book.
Yeah. I'm a huge Bobby Kennedy fan. And as I've told you before, I like to call him Bobby because I've read that his close friends called him Bobby. So he's somebody that I look up to because he didn't start his journey understanding things like privilege. And I like to tell people, like, I'm the most privileged person in the world other than my, being born into the Kennedy family,
right?
Famous and wealthy. Otherwise, I've got all the check marks. But what happened with him is after his brother was assassinated, in between that time and when he ran for president in 1968, he went through a complete transformation and his eyes opened, and he was really fighting for just sort of everybody that had been marginalized and discriminated against, and selflessly, and was just pure about it. So anyways, to me, he's somebody I look up to. This particular quote is a little bit of a call to action. As you know, my blog is called Begin the Begin. I just like this idea of action. Let's take action. If you see a problem, go after it. And so it just felt right to me for this book to start it off. I also put Bobby Kennedy as a quote in the first book as well.
Well, you quote people like Bobby Kennedy, and I quote people like Vanilla Ice. If you got a problem, yo, I'll solve it.
Yep.
That's we have different styles, but that's okay.
Yeah, but both heroes of ours.
Both poets in their own right, and certainly heroes for many. Yeah. So you mentioned that your blog is called Begin the Begin, and you sort of separated the three major sections of this book. And I sort of look at the three sections as there's the prep section of the book, like what do you do to prepare? There's the action section, like what do you do? And then there's the how do you transition back to some normalcy? And so those, to me, felt like the three major, but you named them, each chapter or each section, after a very well-known and prominent song. And each song was written by a Georgia band or artist. So the first chapter or section is Begin the Begin, which I knew is the REM song off of Life's Rich Pageant. The second one is Get Out the Map, which is a song by the Indigo Girls. And then the third one is Scarred But Smarter, which is a driving and crying song.
That's right.
Kevin Kinney, local legend, the lead singer there. So tell me why you why you worked those three particular songs. Are those songs meaningful to you? Do they have meaning in terms of the larger context and the story of the book?
Yeah, so you're right. It was three sort of sections of the book, and I had different names for those sections at first. I think the middle section was called the messy middle. The idea that, like, now you're in the crisis, now you're dealing with this. where we're gonna learn as we go. There's only so much you can plan. But then I kept coming down. It was really, I had Begin the Begin and Scarred But Smarter. I just always loved Scarred But Smarter. It's sort of, I love the song's great, but I also love that idea. And then Rochelle really pushed me to go deep on making those the titles, and worked with me on the second one. But Indigo Girls is, for my wife and I, one of our favorite bands, and we like Get Out the Map a ton, and it just felt right because it's like, all right, get out the map, right? We're on this journey now. Let's do this. So
Yeah.
It was fun. I'm really curious how many people get those references. Did Get Out the Map, was that an obvious?
No. So for me, I knew Begin Again. Obviously, I mean, I'm an REM fan, and also I knew you had already used Begin to Begin in other parts of your life. And then Scarred But Smarter, I immediately knew because I'm also a Driving and Crying fan, and I just knew the song. And then I was like, I'll bet that middle one is the song too. And I forgot who. I was like, I'm sure I know it, but I don't remember what song it is. And then I Googled it and immediately, Indigo Girls, of course, like makes total sense.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
It's, I love that you did that. It's fun and also meaningful, and also, gives a little nod to your home state of Georgia and the artists that are produced out of here. Next book, you got to throw in some, Ray Charles and Otis Redding and B-52s, and you got to like, there's so many amazing bands that have come out of Georgia. James Brown.
I was really trying to dig deep on, this has nothing to do with Georgia, but I was trying to dig deep on James Taylor to see if I could hit him into one of those, because he's a favorite of mine as well. It was more about my favorites.
You did go to college in Carolina, so
in his mind
you might be going
there.
Yeah. So I already asked you kind of what order you suggest reading the books in, but how do you suggest that somebody that's reading these books use them, or even particularly this crisis turnaround? I mean, is this oh shit, I'm in the middle of a crisis and now I need to start reading, or is it good to read it before you even get into the crisis, or how would you recommend somebody using it?
It's a great question. Certainly if you're in the middle of a crisis and looking for some tips, some advice, some thoughts, I hope that the book can be helpful. I always find that, like, if I read a book on business and I get 3 or 4 good ideas, that's worth it. It's really hard. As leaders, you learn by experiencing. You try things, you learn, you fall down, you get back up, or I think you learn by others. And so, I hope that the crisis turnaround can be relevant both during a crisis and not. I would read them in the order just because the characters develop that way. Mm-hmm. There's definitely principles in the 5-day turnaround that I feel very strongly about if you're sort of thinking about how do I build my company. But I think you could read them in sort of any order. The next book I'll do will be Culture Turnaround, and it'll happen a year or 2 before crisis and sort of the chronology of the book. But that one's going to dive a little more deeply into, okay, how do you build your company? Yeah. Starting from scratch, if you will.
In terms of the ordering of the books, I know in the crisis turnaround, you reference things like PVTV, which is a big concept in the 5-day turnaround, which is purpose, vision, tenets, and values. And there's a lot written in that book about, in the 5-day turnaround, about how do you come up with your PVTV and what does that mean for your company. And so there's some assumptions in the crisis turnaround that you've already done some of that legwork. So it sounds like you're going to go deeper into that in the next book, so again, you still recommend reading the culture book first and then the crisis and then the turnaround, if that's.
Yeah. Once I'm done with it, we'll see. But as you know, when the crisis turnaround finishes, it sort of leads into the problem that happens in the 5-day turnaround. So I'm really interested in the character development of the people in the books. And I even have the idea of like taking a sort of a micro aspect of leadership and writing a short story using the characters and just trying to find ways to bring that to life. It's also interesting because it's a way for me to tell stories that are pretty much true, but that I wouldn't want to put out there maybe because somebody's name would be attached to it. Write it in this book, and there'll be a lot of that in the culture turnaround. Stories that you and I both know from Engage that I probably wouldn't want to write about the person.
Right.
they're true. So I can put them into this, fictional business book.
So this one will be even easier for us to know who you're like. For those of us who know the players involved, we'll kind of get to figure it out.
Yeah,
How to
I think
play that
so.
game. So a couple other questions about this book particularly is, one thing is, would you change anything about either this book or the 5-day turnaround, given even more recent events that are happening in the world? Like, I know since you wrote this book, this was about a crisis turnaround, specifically about a pandemic. And
Mm-hmm.
since then, we've had a lot of issues around race relations in the United States and police and dealing with kind of cultural issues and turbulent.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you would change anything about any of the book that you just wrote based on what's happening today.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Perhaps I should. Perhaps there are things that I should think about from that perspective.
Second edition.
Yeah. I don't know that I feel qualified to write that kind of lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that, like, I did try to write this crisis turnaround book for it to be relevant for any kind of crisis.
Right.
I modeled the pandemic and an economic crisis, but I think it could have been something during 9/11 that maybe there's lessons in there to say, okay, how do we deal with this? Like, for instance, being very open and transparent and allowing for courageous conversations with your team is applicable no matter what the crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we've done at Dragon Army around what's happening with race. That's something we did when quarantine happened. So I do think that there's sort of key pillars, but I would want to make sure that I'm qualified to write about certain topics, and I'm not sure that race is something that I'm ready to or ever will be, quite honestly.
Yeah. So I've got one kind of final question for you related to this. So what do you hope that readers will get out of this particular book? Like, it reads to me like a series of mini lessons, lots of little tips, it's almost like a laundry list of tips.
Yeah.
So how do you apply that? How do you hope that readers will apply that? What do you hope that they'll get out of it?
One of the things I hope, I was really excited when you stepped out to start Setup and become an entrepreneur. How many years ago was that?
A little over 6 years.
Yep. Because the world needs more leaders with heart and that are willing to build their business the right way. So if I think about the theme, the overarching theme or themes that go through both books, and certainly will go through the culture turnaround, it's being honest. It's caring about others. It's this idea that you can build a company that's successful, that's growing, but that also stands for something, that has a purpose, that puts its people above profit, that does the right thing. I think too many people think that they'll do the right thing once they're retired. They'll support this nonprofit. They'll do this. I actually think you have a much greater opportunity to impact lives when you're managing people, when you're building a business. So that's a theme I think that weaves its way through in different ways. So I'm a big proponent of open book management. Part of that's because let's build trust. Let's have active conversations. Let's build a company where everybody feels like they're a part of it, right? So there's lessons I think that cut across all of them that I'd want somebody to take away. I can be a leader that cares.
So after your 2 books, what's the one book you would recommend that's not written by Jeff Hilimire that people should read if they want to learn more about building the kind of company that you're talking about?
Yeah. I'm, as I said, I'm a big Patrick Lencioni fan. I think I can't recommend any book above The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It sounds obvious sort of when you talk about it, but trust within a team has the most ability to unlock the potential of a team, and also can restrict a team more than anything. And that could be company-wide, that can be a team in general. And that book helps you realize you have to be vulnerable. You have to push for difficult conversations. That's something the first, 15, 17 years of my career I didn't do. I didn't know to do. I didn't think about it. With Dragon Army, we work hard to do that. And I think it builds a company that can achieve anything when you can really trust each other. So that to me would be the 5 dysfunctions of the team is the one I have to go with.
Great. So this is the age-old question. If somebody wants to, number one, find the book, where should they go? And number two, if they want to get in touch with you, how should they do it?
Okay, yeah. So the first, Amazon. That's the easiest.
What are they Googling when they get, or what are they Amazoning when they get there?
Well, you definitely do my name, Jeff Hilimire. I'm the only Jeff Hilimire author.
Hilimire.
That's right. Yep. And then certainly, if you go to my website, there's ways to connect with me, which is just jeffhilimire.com. So there's email, Twitter, stuff like that.
Great. Thanks for the time, Jeff. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.